Okay. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to tonight's BioDevils podcast. Apologies for the delays. We had some technical issues, but we should be live now with Eric, the lead developer for Road Fever, with we're just going to be doing a interview and quick Q&A segment. So, Eric, why don't you tell us what Road Fever is about exactly for those who might not know what it is?
Okay. It's sort of a Resident Evil clone, you could say, for the classic game. And we want to make sure that we preserve everything that we loved about those games,
Mhm.
but we don't want the formula to grow stale. So, sort of adding some new elements for preserving all the old ones that we felt were important. So, for instance, of course, you have your static camera, you have your pathway, and you have your limited inventory, you have tank controls and all that. And that's, I feel, the core of the old Resident Evil games. And using that, we could go into some more complex aspects of what made the game so good, but I think we'll do that after. These, I think, are the core mechanics of the game, and so we're using those, and we're adding things to that, things like uh, maybe a bleeding system, for certain monsters that are higher difficulty, and more limitations that we place on them because another thing, survival horror is very much about the limitations that you place on the player, and that's uh, that's the mechanic side of things. From a setting type of thing, we are moving from modern day Raccoon City into Victorian Ireland, which is going to be interesting, I think. And what that does to me, I've always noticed that Resident Evil tended to take a lot of older things for its a way to create fear. You know, things that are old that you don't know much about, they're very mysterious, and we as humans are afraid of things we don't know about. So, fear of the unknown is a very powerful thing. So, we are using that. You know, you take the Spencer Mansion, for example, and you'll notice, even though it's supposedly built in the 1960s, a lot of things about it tend to resemble things from the 1800s or, you know, maybe 1910 or so. It doesn't really look like a 1960s mansion. So we're going one step further and we're going all the way back into the 1800s. And what that does is, from a gameplay perspective, is the weaponry is not as advanced. There's no chance for things like radios and such. None of that would be available. And the weapons being less advanced, what we're doing, one of the things that we're doing is we are making it so that most of them cannot be reloaded in combat because it would take too long. So that, I think, about sums up sort of your gameplay and your setting, how it's the same and how it's different in a very general sense.
Okay, I guess that was a very great way to describe the game. Um, I know you and myself we were talking a bit about like some of the ideas and concepts for the game. Can you tell us a little bit about like what types of weaponry we will see in Road Fever?
I missed the word there. What type of what now?
What type of weaponry we will see in Road Fever?
Well, similar to the classic Resident Evil games, I felt it was important to have your basic handgun and shotgun. Um, there tends to be more weaponry available in Resident Evil than that. And we have a couple of other ones, but we're keeping it a bit more handgun and shotgun because I know this may actually seem a bit sacrilegious if you love classic Resident Evil, but by the end of them, I often felt they were too easy. So I am probably going to be of the mind that we don't have much else. Now, there's two handguns. One of them is a six shooter, so that of course only has six bullets, and that one can't be reloaded in combat unless you use a speed loader. That's a thing you can find to put your bullets in. You can load them all at once, and that will be available a bit later in the game. That handgun is a bit more powerful than the other handgun, which is I forget the technical name of it, but it's actually no, I didn't do this on purpose, but it happens to be when I did all my research, the best handgun happens to be the Red 9 from Resident Evil 4. It's not going to act like it very much because that while they use the name and the model, but it functions very differently. We're going to make it a bit more authentic. That gun was made in I think the 1880s, and it holds 10 rounds and you can load it very quickly, but it won't be as powerful as the six shooter. That's your trade off. It's a bit more, it's faster and easier to use, but it's less powerful. So those are handguns. There's a shotgun, which interesting mechanic I want to implement. We haven't done anything with this yet, but when you press the reload button, you reload one shell. So you can reload that one in combat, but only one shell at a time, which allows you to break up your reloads, and that makes it more manageable when you're surrounded by zombies. And I think that can create a lot of tension. Get that one shell in there, blast them all away, run to the other side of the room, put another shell in, etc. And those are your main weapons in the game. Other weapons we have plans for. There's a very old-fashioned grenade launcher, which they call I forget what they call it now, but a hand mortar, and that it was never used with any frequency because it's very dangerous. So I'm thinking we'll give it a chance to set you on fire and you take damage.
That
Um,
that I'm sorry to interrupt, but like that that's an interesting concept actually. I think you did mention that like you were gonna try to introduce something like that, and I mentioned because there's already a design for it that you've showed me that was made in real life. I mentioned maybe trying like putting your own spin on it and like make a fictional quote unquote design because video games do that like all the time. Um, and for example, like Capcom with Resident Evil Zero, they gave Billy Cohen a Colt 45. However, they gave Billy Cohen's Colt 45 a slide that does not exist for that particular firearm.
yeah, that type of thing happens a lot in games, and I want to try to preserve authenticity, but I may wind up deciding that it would be better for gameplay if we don't. But I'm going to approach it at first, hoping to preserve exactly what the firearm would be capable of in real life in 1893.
Okay. I think Brandon had some questions he wanted to ask, so I'll let Brandon go for the next question.
I want to know is that are you going to expand to other areas in Road Fever besides a mansion?
We are. So the way the game goes is you start off at your cottage, and it's very much a tribute, I think, to I think I got this idea unconsciously from Resident Evil 2. You start inside your cottage, and you climb out the window, and you basically make your way from that cottage to the mansion. And I think I got that idea from the way Resident Evil 2 just kind of thrusts you in the midst of it's about 5 or 6 zombies, and you have to make your way to the police station. And I want to do something like that, I think. And so that's the very beginning of the game. And you go to the mansion because your son has run away. He thought the mansion was haunted and be fun to go to his friends there and just have a bit of a laugh there. But then there's a zombie outbreak, so you say, well, you didn't want your son going there in the first place, but now doubly so, you want to find him so he doesn't sort of die. Um, so then after that, your goal is to escape the mansion. You want to find your son. You want to find your wife. Actually, that gets introduced in the very beginning of the very beginning cutscene. So you want to find your son and your wife, and then you want to escape the mansion. And what you wind up doing is there's an underground passage because the fellow that owns the mansion or did own the mansion some years back. It's supposedly haunted because he supposedly killed everyone else that lived there because he went crazy. He was paranoid. So he had some weird because of his paranoia, he had like an underground passage, and you use that to get to what's probably going to be a train. I think probably going to be get to the railway station, and you will somehow go on this train, and that'll you ride that across Ireland, and the game takes place in County Kerry. I haven't decided exactly where. It's going to depend on a few things, but that's all during the southwest. And what's going to happen is the train is going to bring you. You're going to wind up in Dublin, and it's going to be a totally different environment. And the reason you wind up in Dublin is your other son that's moved out of your house ages ago. He lives there. He works in a factory or warehouse or something. I haven't decided yet. Um, but there's a bunch of creepy Victorian buildings that I like the look of, and I've always kind of thought it'd be really creepy. Some of these super gigantic brick things with dark, gigantic windows with Victorian machinery inside, but you go in there and there's no lights, and I think that'd be kind of creepy. So a building like that is where he works, and that's the gameplay and atmosphere justification. Story-wise, you want to find him, you want to get as far away from the zombie outbreak as possible, and you want to get some sort of maybe tell some authorities or something, which you'll find out as you go in the game. That's not really going to work because the zombie outbreak is has covered the entire island, and so in Dublin it's a bit more of a. It's not as urban as it is today, but it's more urban than the beginning of the game, and you go through the streets a bit. I suppose that's something of a tribute to Resident Evil 3, but I'm not really thinking of it that way. These ideas I came up with them, and I think is sort of the source of them, but I'm not thinking, oh, I want to do Resident Evil 3, I want to do Resident Evil 2. It's more like these ideas are coming to me, and I think this is my inspiration. I theorize that. So then there's going to be some new enemies that get introduced there, and you wind up in this factory warehouse type of thing where your son works, and you're looking for him, and that's the final area of the game. If if I can get it done, the underground passage I'd like to be a bit more expansive, but we may have to cut the majority of that, and it may wind up being sort of a thing that they just say, I went through the underground passageway, now I'm at a railway station. We may have to skip most of that for time and not time for budget and manpower restraints. But everything else that I'm mentioning is I'm pretty sure is going to happen.
Okay, this is for the weapons. are you gonna use different types of ammunition like in the classic Resident Evils? If so, then what type of ammunition you gonna use?
Um, well, each weapon is probably only going to have one type of ammunition, as far as I can tell, but there'll be a few different types of weapons. You have the two handguns. They should use different ammunition, I think. I'm not really too knowledgeable about firearms, but when I did do all the research, I came up with these weapons. I should have looked into their ammunition, but I similar to in order to take some inspiration from Resident Evil 3, but not to do the same thing, I opted for a crafting system for your health items, not for your ammunition. Um, so the health system in the game, as it stands right now, is very complex, but the ammunition less so. I think each weapon is going to have one type of ammunition. I don't want to say that's 100% certain, but that's very probable.
Um, to kind of go off of that question that Brandon just asked, I when we were talking, I also brought up bolt action rifles because those were prevalent during that time. Are those going to be a thing in Road Fever as an unlock or something you can find later on?
There, actually, sort of a plan I had was to make the rifle replace the Magnum. The Magnum, as we see it in Resident Evil, nothing like that existed at that time. So there's a rifle that I haven't decided. I don't want to give the player too much power. So I haven't decided. It's going to be in the final area of the game, most likely when you can find it. But so it'll act very similar to the Magnum. If you shoot a zombie, its head explodes. But you will get very scarce ammunition in the game. You'll find there's very little of it, so it's probably best reserved for bosses. Another thing I was considering, play testing is going to be uh, what determines a lot of this. So it may be the case that you're fighting the final boss, and this weapon is what you need to defeat it, and you don't get access to that weapon until that fight, and maybe you have to do something in the middle of the fight to get to the weapon, similar to the rocket launcher, but it won't be a one-hit kill. Uh, it may be something like that, or it may not be. It may have a different weapon fulfill that function, and maybe this rifle will be more on your what would be the equivalent of say hunters or lickers, that type of high level or rather mid level enemy is what you may want to use it on during the last section of the game. A lot of the last section is a bit more fuzzy because development on the earlier sections needs to be completed before we can have a really concrete idea of how the final sections are going to go.
Okay. And in regards to like actually playing the game and completing it, are there any plans to do like a new game plus mode where you can carry over your items by any chance, or something like Resident Evil 3 had this where like if you do mercenaries mode, you can um, unlock specific weapons that are only available for that particular mode to be unlocked in, and you can get various things like rocket launchers, etc. Although, of course, I'm sure that would be very different for Road Fever's case because of the time period, as well as in Resident Evil 3 also, or the Mercenaries also had an infinite ammo unlock. Is that something that we could potentially see in Road Fever?
Um, for me, I was personally never interested in items that made the game easier. So what I may do is if that's something that a lot of people desire, I would make plans to include it. It wouldn't be very difficult to do so. But me as a game designer, I like to unlock things that makes a game more difficult rather than less difficult. So you can, if there's a demand for infinite ammo, then sure you can unlock that. Uh, if there isn't, then it may not be included. I'm not sure yet. But my plans for New Game Plus would be more like, as I mentioned earlier, there's a hunger system that we have in mind, and the hunger system would, if in place during the very first playthrough, would discourage um, the sort of a slow burn and taking in all the atmosphere. So I'm not planning to put the hunger system on until a second playthrough. So that's one thing that a new game plus would have in store for you. You have this new element of difficulty, and that's how I like to play my games. I like to make them more difficult with each successive playthrough. Uh, and we'll talk a bit, I think, afterwards about my plans for things like knife runs and such. I think the more you bait the game, the more challenges you would unlock. I think that would be more along the lines of my style of design. But if there is some sort of demand for things like unlocking infinite ammunition or very high powered weapons, I, I maybe people do want that, and if that's the case, I'll allow for that and factor that in. Now, in terms of a mercenaries mode, I actually this is extremely ambitious and it may not happen, but what I really want to do if things take off a bit more than they have at this juncture is I want to include something that's unlocked by baiting the game one time, and that's something similar to a kind of either Resident Evil 3 Mercenaries mode or the Hunk game, the Fourth Survivor from Resident Evil 2, and that's not the ambitious thing. That won't be too difficult to implement. But what I really want to do is I want to, after that's beaten one time, that mode, and it'll be a very short thing. Hunk's game on average takes about, for an average person that's actually beating it and not dying, I'd say it takes about 8 minutes. Um, so it'll be that length. But once that's done, I really want to offer players the ability to make their own map in that style of game. Very kind of a short thing. You make a bunch of rooms that connect, and will maybe offer. The difficult thing is a static camera. That's what makes it so ambitious. We have uh, a lot of testing to do to make that work, because players would then need to have different camera options, and it's getting a bit messy designing it. Um, but that's the very ambitious thing that I really want to do is make a map editor for a kind of a mercenaries mode, Resident Evil 3 type of mercenaries, not really the newer games, are more like the Fourth Survivor, I suppose. So a map editor would be great for that, and it's extremely ambitious. It may not happen, but that is something I really want to do.
Um, yeah, this is for Resident Evil 3. Are you going to have any other Resident Evil 3 inspired actions in Road Fever, like having a giant monster chase you around?
Yes. Well, that is something that I haven't decided yet. That kind of a stalker enemy, I love it. Uh, but that's not decided yet. I haven't decided because essentially because it's been done. Um, so if I decide that I want us to do that, I want to make sure we do it justice. And at this stage, we don't have anything concrete planned for that, but it may be something that we decide to take on. But it's quite a challenge. and I have to depend on a lot of people to play test and everything, it can add a whole, it can really delay progress of development if we decide to take that on. But it is something that I'm very interested in. I personally felt Nemesis is very successful, uh, but if you do a stalker type of enemy wrong, it can be really annoying for the player. So I want to come to that conclusion with everybody's input and say, are we all ready for this? Because we're going to have to work very hard on making it scary and not frustrating and not annoying. When your stalker enemy comes on the scene, you want players to be afraid. You don't want them to say, "Oh no, not this guy again." Uh, Let me get him out of the way. So, uh, in short, I like the idea, but we don't have any concrete plans for these reasons.
Okay. Yeah. Now this could be a similar question, but will you take any inspiration from the modern Resident Evil games, ranging from, I guess, maybe Code Veronica through Revelations, Revelations 2?
Um, Code Veronica, I would consider a classic one. I and Nothing specific to that game is coming to mind, but besides the fact that that game was full 3D, and I don't believe we're going with pre-rendered backgrounds in this one, even though the cameras will be static. And what that allows for is um, some movable cameras, despite the majority of them being fixed. But we haven't decided on moving cameras yet. Sometimes when I see a game that's half fixed cameras and half moving cameras, I I start to find the moving cameras to be lazy, and I'm thinking, you seriously couldn't have thought of a good angle for that. So I don't know yet, but 3D cameras are a possibility. Um, Anything beyond Code Veronica and Zero and the remake, beyond all those, once we go to Resident Evil 4 and 5 and such, I can't think of anything that's gonna be in the game that comes from those. If you have a specific idea, you can ask me, but I can't think of anything besides maybe the fact that Resident Evil 4 had some seriously tense boss fights, and a lot of the older games, I don't always feel the boss fights are that difficult, and I may try to capture that feeling like when you fight, for example, U3 or 8 in Resident Evil 4, that is some serious tension. Whereas you don't always get tension like that in the classic games, which is one of the things I disliked. But at the same time, I don't have any plans for a an over-the-shoulder camera or anything like that. I don't have any plans for an aiming mode where you go over the shoulder or first person or anything like that. I feel that that kind of to me, I find that it reminds me I'm playing a game. It feels very arcade-like. So I'm sticking with static camera, auto aim, which does limit you in mechanics, in making a boss fight that's difficult. So that's one of the challenges we have to wrestle with. So any any modern aspects of those games that you're curious about, go ahead and ask me. I can't think of any that we're preserving from 4 and on.
Okay, well, let's say about difficulty, like for example, in 5 and 6, the difficulty for professional and no hope is kind of spiking. And the partner, well, there would be like a partner, even if it's limited, like in the classics,
Um,
limited
I
time, I mean,
limited. Sorry, I didn't catch that.
like like limited time. Like for example, Ada, she comes in like here and there, not full
Um,
time.
I haven't decided on anything like that. For the most part, you have your one character. Um, I think it'll be interesting. But one of the problems I'm facing is budget. The more characters you have, it's exponential the work it and therefore potentially money it will take to get characters to interact or that type of thing. Um, as far as just without a story reason, um, that may be a bit more possible. I want to make the game very open to modding as well, so you may see a huge number of extra character models and such that other people put in. But as for occasions when you switch to another person like Ada in number two, I don't have any concrete plans for that, but there's one instance I was actually considering something like that, but I'm not really sure. It may not work. It's at the very end of the game. Otherwise, you're not going to see too many people in the game. So it would be a bit odd if you had another person available. As far as so and no two people at the same time. You'll always be alone. Um, as far as difficulty is concerned, I am a huge proponent of difficulty, successive difficulty. So the more times you beat the game, I would love to make it more difficult and more difficult. Every time you beat the game, you unlock a new challenge. So the first one is the hunger mode, uh, and after that you can expect it to culminate in kind of a knife run mode where you pick the mode and no other weapons are in the game. It's designed to be beaten with a knife. There's nothing else, just a knife. And for the record, yes, I have beaten them all with a knife. I kind of can't go back now. It's you see the games in a new way. You see what made them so great. So many different. Every game has a different type of zombie animation and everything. So you start to get really in touch with the game if you beat it with a knife. And I want to design a mode for that, so that maybe can make it slightly more accessible if you have it actually as a mode that you select. People will say, I'm going to do the knife mode now, and it makes it a bit less alien of concept to try it. I think a lot of people look at it and say, there's no way you can beat Resident Evil, whatever, with a knife. And of course, now you can go on YouTube and you can see everyone that's done it. But you think of certain bosses and you think that's impossible, so you don't try it. Whereas what I want to do is I want to encourage a knife run as the ultimate challenge of the game. Um, so there's going to be a knife mode, and that kind of proves to a player this was designed to beat me half to death, but it was designed for me to be able to overcome it, and that's proven by having the option there in the menu. Uh, so that's sort of what I'm planning for difficulties.
Um, I just kind of want to take a step back. Earlier, you mentioned that the mansion or the yeah, it was a mansion, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're calling it a manner to differentiate, but it's really just though it doesn't look as much like a clone as it actually is. So yeah, go ahead, it's a mansion.
Um, so in earlier you were saying that there's like some backstory to the mansion. Is that somehow connected to the outbreak that's taking place within Ireland?
That's not really connected, but the weird design of the mansion and the kind of cryptic, the immense amount of locked doors and such. There's a story reason for that. It's that he's a mad bastard, this fella. Uh, the outbreak is. I had considered making it connected to the backstory of the mansion, but ultimately it doesn't really. It seems a bit far fetched. So uh, because I, being the person that has written the story, um, I know what it is. I don't really want to give too much away, but it would seem very, very unlikely that the two events will be connected. So the backstory of the mansion, which you find out in the very beginning of the game, is uh, your son runs away because it's haunted, and it's supposedly haunted because the old master of the manor, he was suspicious because he was insane that his wife was going to kill him. So he kills her first, and they say he killed all his servants as well to prevent them from, retaliating after the death of his wife. So it's a bit of a creepy backstory there. But what you also find out is that's a hideout. Now, I don't think people that live outside of Ireland usually know the history of Ireland, but at that time, there are a lot of revolutions being planned and being put down by the British government. And so the story here is there's a band of revolutionaries using that as a hideout, and that kind of explains away all the weapons you'll be finding, all the ammunition and such, and even the food on the hunger mode. So it explains why the mansion is both abandoned and yet housing a bunch of weapons and such. So that's that's that. The outbreak, you're actually going to find out at the very end of the game what's caused it. We're going to fast forward into probably the 1940s or so, and you're going to have the main character's grandson do a voiceover explaining that with the science they had in 1893, they couldn't really work it out, but in hindsight, now our medical advances have brought us to the point where we can sort of find out the cause of the virus, and they piece together what actually happened, and it's pretty interesting. But I don't really want to give it away.
Um, Earlier you mentioned the hunger system. I wanted to ask about like a bleeding mechanic, kind of like Dino Crisis had, and you also mentioned like the knife run mode or like a knife run mode. Is there a way that you can like enable or disable those at any point in time? Like, say, if you want to just automatically start off with those modes, could you potentially do that?
The bleeding mechanic is actually a core mechanic of the whole game. The health system is very complex compared to your standard health. You have two health bars. Well, actually, they won't be shown as bars. They are two health statuses. One of them is for uh, physical blows that you're stricken, and that's going to be where bleeding is measured, and that's from things like if you get rammed by one of the bigger enemies or bitten by, well, nothing that draws blood usually. So if you get knocked around a bit, that's going to be your physical damage. And the bleeding, if you're slashed with a claw or something, that's bleeding. Whereas you have another health status, which is your resistance to the virus. What you're going to find is a few people have certain, I don't know if it'll be a blood type or a certain genes in them that allow them to be resistant to this type of virus. And though you're not immune, you don't turn into a zombie instantly like the way a lot of other people that you'll be encountering do. One bite from a zombie will turn most people, but the particular character you play as has a bit more resistance. It's not going to be a huge amount. It's going to be like 3 bites or something, and that's your viral resistance. And you have your bleeding and other physical damage meter, which again won't be shown as a meter. It'll be similar to the way they show you fine and caution and danger in the Resident Evil games. Um, so if the more damage you take there, the more bleeding damage you take, the more physically you're affected with your walking and running it slower. In addition to that, you bleed. You'll see spots of blood on the floor, similar to Dino Crisis. Uh, I didn't feel that the mechanic was really well done in Dino Crisis. Honestly, I I love the concept, and I fully admit I actually took it straight from that. But one of the reasons I decided to do it is I felt that their implementation of it didn't really do it justice. It's a great concept, but they didn't really do much with it. So you'll find that whether or not you're bleeding will determine the frequency of certain enemies following you, certain ambushes taking place, and the more you run when you're severely damaged with your bleeding, the more health you lose. So you don't want to run if you're going down into the lower end of caution in that bleeding status. Whereas if you are down towards a lower end of caution in the viral resistance meter, that doesn't get affected by running. So there's a lot of complexity to the health system, and the bleeding mechanic will, if you're actually bleeding, it will mostly affect when enemies do or don't ambush you or follow you through rooms.
Uh,
Okay, to like piggyback on to the knife run, will there be different types of knives or any other variants of knives? Because the knife in Resident Evil are kind of underwhelming. So I'm wondering like will we get stronger knives in the knife run or will we still get the same one?
Um, the full answer to that's going to be determined by a lot of play testing, but in the standard game, there's a plan for you have your knife, then you can access, and that knife is like a kitchen knife. Ned gets it from his cottage, and that's it's just a big knife. It's going to be fairly dull and not really meant for cutting people up. So when you get to the mansion, if you go out in the back, you'll find that like an actual Victorian mansion, because I did a lot of research on this, and it's going to be very authentic. Um, there's actually something called a knife house, and you'll be able to access a grindstone in there. Now, I haven't. There's going to be four knives in the game, and they won't be the most powerful one won't be incredibly powerful in the main game anyway. You have your regular kitchen knife, and you have a sharpened version of it. Then you have more of a combat knife, and you can sharpen that. And it won't be, it still won't be extremely powerful, because that's the idea. Honestly, it's meant to create desperation. If you resort into using a knife, which I do want to be the case, I want it to be the case that you do need to use a knife. I don't want there to be enough ammunition to kill everything. But if you get desperate enough to start using a knife, you'll find that it works if you do it right. But if you do it wrong, you can get yourself seriously messed up. So Um, that's for the main game. For the knife run mode, I I believe we will really want to see how it goes. That's not remotely we're not remotely there yet. If it turns out that it's just too much, then maybe we'll put another knife in that's slightly stronger that you can unlock, or rather find later in the game. But there's I'd rather not do that. I'd only do it if it's absolutely necessary. Uh, and it may be the case that some people Uh, some people won't find it possible to use the knives that you get in a standard game to fight some of the bosses and such. And maybe we'll have to give them a break. But in that, if that's the case, there will have to be a knife run mode where you that's even more difficult, to cater to the people like me that want to do the most difficult thing that the game has to offer, and we would probably not use some of the higher powered knives, and we would only use the knives in the standard game in this ultimate knife run mode. But we really do have to see how it goes. It may be the case that I discard that idea and decide that the knife run mode does need higher powered knives, maybe just for bosses or something. We'll have to see how that goes.
Okay, this is for the bleeding mechanic. S- will there be like a Metal Gear Solid 3 type survival gameplay system where instead of being a simple system like in Resident Evil, where you just go to the menu, get a herb and heal, where you had to like bandage yourself up, give yourself some neurotoxins or anything like that to stop the bleeding, poisons or whatnot,
There will
or
actually,
stitching.
I haven't decided exactly how much of the physical um, physical aid would be required, things like stitching and sewing, because as nice as that seemed in Metal Gear Solid 3, it's not exactly realistic either. So it's a very simplified version of what you'd have to do. So what I'm opting for is actually now you have to give our good friend Dom here credit. He actually came up with the idea of using syringes, and I've really designed the whole system based on that. What's going to happen is your first health item will be found in the manor when you get there, and you'll find it on a soldier. And the soldier will have a syringe, and he'll have on him he'll have instructions on how to use the syringe, because it's very no, I'm making all of this up. It didn't happen uh, this way in history, but supposedly in this universe, there's a um, there's a medical advancement that we're on the fringe of, which has several different fluids that you can inject into yourself that do some serious damage against certain physical ailments, and so it's uh, it, it's going to be a very complex healing system, but I don't think we're going to go for much of the physical things like bandages, which is going to be more like neurotoxins is one. I haven't decided on all the different words, but similar to I think it's my inspiration for this comes from I think Resident Evil 3's ammo crafting system and Metal Gear Solid 3's um, patching yourself up system. It's going to be such that you find, say, fluid A and fluid B, and they combine to make fluid C, and it's going to be very complex, and it's going to be to the point where now remember you have two health meters that you have to watch. You have your bleeding one and you have your viral resistance one, and different different ones of these drugs are going to affect the two meters differently, and some of them will affect only one, some of them will affect both of them, some of them will affect one in a very positive way, and the other one may take a negative effect, and you have to decide, well, this is the only health item I have. Is it worth it to heal my bleeding and take a hit on my viral resistance? You have to weigh out decisions like that, and another thing that I've actually just thought of this week is if you take the same drug, and these are all non-existent drugs, they're all fictional drugs, so I'll have to name all of them, but they may wind up with names like neurotoxin, for example. Um, but if you take the same one too rapidly, you may develop um, a sort of dependency on it. You may become slightly addicted to it, and how exactly that'll play out in game, I haven't decided yet. But how will you cure yourself, or how you deal with that mild addiction that it causes? I haven't decided that yet, or what the effects will be. But I really want to implement something that does that justice. This concept of being addicted to your health item.
In terms of like the enemy designs, outside of just zombies, are there any like types of monsters that may have been inspired by Resident Evil or maybe like other survival horror games like Extinction or Dino Crisis or anything like that?
Funny you should mention Extinction. I haven't played it yet, but only this last couple of months I heard of it, and I'm just mad to play it. I can't wait. Once I finished Metal Gear Solid 5, I think I'm gonna go back and look at some of the Resident Evil clones from back in the day, and that's one of them I want to look at. It's very highly regarded. Um, so anyway, I haven't played that one yet, so I can't speak on that. But there here's a couple of things we have in mind. You have your standard zombies, of course. I think we want to make them more like the zombies in, say, the remake, in that there won't be necessarily a huge amount of them inside the mansion, but one zombie is kind of a huge problem for you. They take ages to die, and it only takes a couple of bites to put you down. So I really like that concept. Whereas you look at the ones in, say, Resident Evil 2 or 3, they're threatening largely because of their numbers, and they're not that strong. But there's just so many of them that that in itself becomes its problem. So I think we're going more for the fewer but stronger zombies. And I certainly have plans to do something similar to the Crimson Heads. You have to burn the bodies and all that. I love that concept so much. It's one of my favorite things that I've ever seen in a survival horror game. And now, I personally loved The Evil Within, but I found the way that they implemented the burning of the bodies in that game to be very arcade-like and kind of poorly done, at least from a survival horror perspective. So anybody that's played that, we're shying away from that. So
If I could just interrupt for a second.
go ahead.
Fun fact about the Evil Within, there were actually supposed to be enemies that were going to come back. That if you didn't burn up, they would actually come back. Those enemies ended up getting cut from the main game and put into the Julie Kidman DLC. The ones that start glowing up and start blowing up once you shoot them or get too close to them. Um, yeah, originally that was supposed to be what they were going to turn into, but I guess they decided to cut that and put them in the DLC and make that their own enemy type, which kind of unfortunate to see happen, but at the same time, it's kind of cool to see something like that become its own enemy type.
Well, personally, I wouldn't have done it that way. I I think they should have had them come back as something, but it's a Crimson Head is something serious to deal with. If you're new to the game, anyway. Whereas the enemies that you were talking about are, if you have all the weaponry that Sebastian has, they're not that serious a threat. Kidman, of course, has for the majority of her games no weapons, and then very weak weapons. So I feel they were very effective in her game. Whereas in Sebastian's game, I don't think that if you didn't burn them up and they came back as that, I'd have been too concerned, honestly. Whereas a Crimson Head in the remake, if you don't know what you're doing, that is pretty terrifying. Uh, it's going to do some damage on you, and it's something you want to avoid at all costs. One of the last runs I did was I purposely turned every zombie into Crimson Head, and I think if I had done it the first time I played, I'd have kind of gone insane. It was fantastic, but I was a bit too good at the game at that time for it to be a huge threat. So I want to opt for something more like a Crimson Head, but I don't want to copy them exactly. I think that would be bad form. Like, but I want to take heavy inspiration from that. Um, so that's the zombies. You have your zombies, and then you have your super zombies that come back that don't burn the bodies. Um, Besides that, you have there's. I'm personally, I need to. I haven't thought of it yet because it's going to be one of the biggest challenges in game development. I want to do an enemy that hits all the right points that a liquor does, but I don't want to make a liquor. If that makes any sense, it would be a bit too. I think that would be bad form as well. It's like you can't just rip off an enemy. Um, but the things I love about the liquor are it has a creepy breathing. It has no skin, so it looks creepy. The way it crawls is creepy. Um, I love that they're blind. I think that somehow the way it's done is terrifying. I love in some parts of the games, especially the extra games like Hunk's game or Tofu. If you want to avoid damage from a room of liquors, you have to walk through them, and they're because they're blind, so they can't see you, but they can hear you if you do it wrong, and it is really tense. It is some of the tensest moments in games if you opt to walk through a room of liquors to get to a goal. So I want to do something like that. I want a blind enemy that that acts similar to a liquor. The other thing I love about the liquor is they have these animations. They crawl on the walls and they're very calm. But once they are alerted to your presence, but not totally, like say you walk near them but you don't run, they will stand up in a crouching position and just kind of sway, and it is so creepy. And if you move, they go into attack mode, and it's pretty terrifying if you're not prepared for it. Of course, you know if you have your acid round grenade launcher, that's different. But I am purposely not including anything like that because I don't want to be that well prepared for whatever enemy I come up with. Now, that's kind of an abstract enemy. We have other enemies that one of them is called a bleeder, which is I don't know if anybody's familiar with flying foxes, but these are an Australian animal. They look like gigantic bats. So it's going to be like that, a gigantic bat. They actually the flying foxes are kind of cute, but we're going to make them a bit more demonic looking, and they're going to act very like hunters. Um, what they'll do, they're called bleeders because they drool a lot. So wherever they go, they leave puddles of drool, which we're going to make look like blood because at some point they've certainly been feasting on some flesh somewhere in the mansion. So they leave trails of blood as they walk, and that blood is their drool. They're called bleeders because that's if you go into a room and you see that, you should be aware. If you see blood on the ground in a trail like that, you should be aware that the bleeders are going to be close. And you may, I think they're probably going to have a penchant for ambushing you. So you want to be aware if you see a trail of blood, that could be that. And that kind of you don't want to make the wrong move, so that's a bit of a nice survival horror moment. I think walking into a hall, you see that, and you think, how do I avoid this enemy that hasn't come yet? I think Resident Evil is very given to moments like that. They kind of foreshadow a terrible thing that's going to happen to you, and then you have to deal with it. And I love that. So those are some enemy types. We have a bunyip. The bunyip, that's a mythological Australian beast which Um, okay, I'm gonna give a bit of a spoiler here. It's not really a spoiler, but it's not one I care about. The reason there's a couple of Australian animals is the virus does have something to do with Australia, if you're wondering. So a bunyip is fairly famous in Australia. It doesn't exist, but the natives of Australia, all the way back in the day, the 1800s, and of course centuries before that. But in the 1800s, the British Empire, when they kind of went over and decided that they wanted to own Australia and that the people that lived there didn't really matter, these people had stories of a beast called the bunyip, and descriptions of it vary, but all the British people that were sailing over there and talking with the natives, the Maori, they they would hear stories about this thing, and for a long time, people believed it existed. Now, in this game, it does exist, but it's rarely seen by people. So, I haven't decided exactly how to look, but because there's so many different ways it can look, we have a couple of designs in mind, but we haven't decided on one. We haven't decided, is it going to be a huge enemy that only occurs a couple of times, or is it going to be more common? Another enemy is called Adovarhu, which is an Irish mythological beast, and it's what's cool about that one is if you in mythology of Ireland, if you kill one of these monsters, its mate will find you and hunt you down. And I want to bring that to the game. So your best your best course of action is to run by them. But of course, they can chase you through rooms. This will be one of the few enemies that can do that. So you don't want them to see you. You want to sneak past them essentially. So, but if you kill them, uh, they make this horrific noise, and you'll be attacked by its mate. So I think that's pretty interesting. And lastly, um, we have not decided what we're doing for bosses. Uh, we may I may say let's do a stalker type of enemy. It is a strong consideration. In which case, all the boss fights would be a variation on the same theme. Otherwise, there may be several bosses, and as I said earlier, the bunyip could be one of them. Um, but I'm not certain yet. So that's I think where we stand with enemies at the moment.
Okay. Let's see. Will there be any level alterations as you progress through the story?
Not exactly sure what you mean there.
Like for example, as the story progresses, some areas of the game changes.
Ah, yes, of course, of course. You were talking about, say, for example, I think a good example right now besides in Code Veronica, where there sees all her areas one way and Chris sees them totally different. I don't think any drastic changes like that would be in store. Um, but windows breaking or walls breaking because of an enemy, that's very plausible and likely. I know in the remake, sometimes enemies will knock down doors and such. That's something I'm a huge fan of, and that would definitely be in the game. I don't know how dramatic the levels will change, besides things like this or that barrier that you thought was your safety net breaks down and an enemy comes through. Besides that, I'm not really sure how drastic the changes would be.
This is going to be a little throwback to Resident Evil 3. Will there be any story alterations, choices? Like
Live
for
selection, yeah,
sorry, what was that?
like the live selection, yeah.
I suppose so.
No, like the live selection, like when you face Nemesis at the very beginning, for example, it says, "Would you like to fight the monster or go into the police station?" Is that sort of what you're talking about?
Yes.
Um, that would be a huge endeavor. I don't think that with all that we're taking on, I don't think that's going to make it. And it's something I've thought about, but we don't have any concrete design plans or anything like that. And with what we are already planning, I can tell you it's more probable that it's not going to happen, even though it's something I have thought about.
Okay, so since we're kind of running short on time for today's interview, I want to move on to fan questions, and I'll ask some. I know James has been silent for the most part, but he'll try to ask some as well from the subscribers and as well as Brandon. So I'll start with the first one. The first one is asking, will the game be running at 4K 60 frames per second?
Um, well, kind of interesting. This is this is crazy, um, and I think it would piss a lot of people off. So don't take this to heart. I'd have to play test it, but the game, its aesthetic emulates that of a silent film. So it's very grainy. It has no color, um, which done correctly is really good for survival horror. One thing I've considered, and I promise it's not a sort of feeding you a line like the way that AAA games often do. I've considered a lower frame rate for that purpose. But what I think probably have to do is offer that as an option. I think we'd have to strive to get it at 60 frames per second, which is very, very likely. Usually, when games have problems running at 60 frames per second, it's because of both poor optimization and severe crippling of DRM, and we don't plan to do anything like that. The game will be well optimized, and the DRM will just be regular DRM. It's not going to be anything so serious that that it'll cripple the way the game runs. 60 frames per second should not be a problem at all. Um, Although, as I said, I like the concept of if it works, a very low frame rate to emulate silent films from that era. But that would probably be an extra option for people that want to play that way. And maybe I'll encourage that, but I won't deny 60 frames per second because honestly, if I decided we shouldn't do 60 frames per second and the game is capable of running at 60 frames per second, I'm sure people would find a way to run it at 60 frames per second. So may as well just unlock that from the beginning. 4K, I don't know much about 4K personally. I can assure the game is going to run fine. Will it run at 4K, 60 frames per second? There's a very good chance that if you have the hardware for that, then yes, it will. I plan to make it run comparable to whatever's out at the time. Because this game, it may take a while before it's out, and 4K may be a lot more common at that time. So if that's the case, you can doubly be assured that that will happen. So 4K 60 frames per second, very very likely. I don't see any reason why not.
All right, I don't know what happened to James, so I'm just going to ask this question for him. Why did you choose the Victorian setting for Road Fever?
Um, I have a couple of reasons. One of them is the first and foremost, I wanted to distance it from the what people are used to in Resident Evil because I am a bit concerned about things like stopping the staged orders and such. Sorry, cease and desist orders and things like that. So I want to make it a bit obvious that what I'm doing is the gameplay mechanics of the older Resident Evil, but I wanted to make it a bit obvious that I'm not stealing their IP. So that was initial. reason for choosing a very different place and time. I personally love the Victorian era, and a lot of things that I do are already Victorian in aesthetic. I write music and such in a Victorian style. Sometimes uh, I've written a full book and poetry cycle actually set in the Victorian age. So it's something that to me is very comfortable, something I know a lot about. And the last reason is the more I paid attention, the more I found that you can see that Resident Evil always uses old-fashioned things as a way to creep you out. You can see all the zombies in the remake and the first Resident Evil game and Resident Evil Zero. They're all wearing a very kind of old-fashioned clothing. The mansion was built in the 1960s, and they look as if they may well be living in the 1960s. These zombies, when they turned, you can see all this very grand sort of lush molding and carving and architecture. And you'll notice one of the ways they creep you out is what does Chris get? He gets old keys to unlock doors because somehow things that are old kind of frighten us for some reason if you don't know a lot about them. If anything old is presented in a creepy way, it just gains an air of mystery and maybe its power, because it's been through so much. It's I can't explain it exactly, but a lot of people are creeped out by ancient looking things. Things that you'll see in Resident Evil, a lot of the places you go to they're kind of cracked and decrepit, and this is to give you a sense of age, and because age, for some reason, creeps a lot of people out. So I thought, why not go one step further and just set the game in the Victorian era? And what this also does as well is it presents a realistic way to give the player limitations as such as the reloading kind of handicap. You can't reload in battle for a lot of weapons because it will take a very long time. So things like that are why I think that it works. At this point, I couldn't see it being anywhere else, but these are the reasons why I decided to do so in the beginning.
Okay, there are quite a few questions from one particular person, so I'll ask some of the ones that weren't answered. Like one, will there be a playable demo in the near future?
In the near future, unlikely, but that's absolutely something I feel is I feel very passionately that there should be, yeah, when we're at that stage. But development is at the moment it's been a bit hectic. I've personally had to put my duties on the game aside for a couple of weeks for a few personal reasons. Um, it should be noted though that I'm working with a professional studio on the game at this point. I have my people and I have another studio that are helping me out, and I'm composing the music for their CGI film and their game, and they're doing a lot of my models and animations and such. So I think development is gonna sort of progress more quickly once this gets underway a bit more strongly. But I wouldn't make any promises about a playable demo in the near future, though I will make a promise that I intend to put out a playable demo when it's reasonable to do so. A playable demo is absolutely something I want to do. I think it's kind of the correct thing to do.
The next question is there going to be any like gameplay footage or any trailer coming soon in the near future?
Um, that's going to be a bit dependent on how uh, how quickly my relationship with this other studio. See, what happened was my modelers they began to they're all in university right now, and they started to have some serious school commitments and such. So now I'm using this other studio, and they're using me, where it's a give and take relationship. So I don't know exactly how quickly that's going to progress, but provided it progresses at the rate they told me they would expect it to progress, then I would say yes. But I wouldn't make any promises because I don't really I'm not talking to them that long yet, so I wouldn't guarantee anything. I will say that I myself have been before I had to put my work aside for a couple of weeks. I was working on a new version of the manor. This is going to be the third design. The map is the same. The map is fully designed and laid out. I know where every room is going to be, but I was never satisfied with the way it looked. So, and one of my modelers that had to go and commit to some other things like school and such and work, uh, he was designing a new one, but I have no idea when I'm gonna have him back working on the game. The more time passes, the more I don't think he's gonna finish that model. So I've begun doing the model myself, and so provided life stops kind of kicking me in the arse, you can see I would plan to have a sort of a tour of the manor with some of the rooms laid out. That within the next couple of months, um, or and much sooner than that, the outside of the manor and sort of a view of the map and the layout and everything. That's plausible. I don't want to make any guarantees. Things are a bit hectic for me right now, um, and that would be my responsibility. I'm doing the mansion right now, so depending on how things go for me, it can be uh, it can be a long time or it can be a short time. I would say within a couple of months, so I'm hoping to show off the completed manor.
Sorry about that. Will this game come out on Steam and consoles?
Was it a when? I'm not sure. I wouldn't pretend to know when. It's gonna be very likely to be a while unless things catch on with some people that really have sort of money or something. It could be a long, long time. Apologies for that, but that's very likely. It's gonna be a while.
Next question was, is this game going to be eerie like Silent Hill, or is this going to be more like a Clock Tower-esque type of game with some Resident Evil touches?
Um, if you've played Resident Evil, the classic ones, it's mostly like that. Silent Hill, I think they're great games, but oddly enough, I've mostly taken away from them what I don't want to do. Not because they're bad games, but just um, I realize certain things as I play them that aren't going to work in this game. So it would probably wind up being not very like Silent Hill at all. Um, it's most like I would say the remake of Resident Evil One. It's probably most similar to that, but I want it to be its own thing as well as fitting right in with classic Resident Evils. I wanted to have its own. I wanted to stand out and fit in at the same time. If I said it were like one game the most, it it I'd say the remake probably.
All right, and here's our last question: is this game going to get a physical release? If it is, coming to multiple platforms?
Me personally, I'm a PC player, and so this concept of physical releases seems to be more of a console thing. I so only recently am I really seeing a lot of people want this. So I'm in no way against it. I just have to look into how it's distributed and all that. Um, I if there's a huge demand for it, then I can guarantee it. If there's not a huge demand for it, then I can just say I'll do my best. I don't know a lot about that side of things. I know more about making a game than what happens afterwards. So closer to the release of the game, I should be able to be more informative. But it's not something. It's something that I want to do because I know people do want that. I want it on multiple platforms. I feel that a lot of people that would like this type of game grew up playing consoles as I did. I'm just a PC player now, but I grew up with my consoles, and I think the game is much better suited for a controller, and that's more of a console thing again. So I want to release this on consoles, and console players seem to like their physical releases, which is what I'm going to try to do.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on to the podcast tonight. We'll definitely be happy to have you come back if you ever want to talk about the game in the later future when you have more information on the game, like things like a release date and platforms and whatnot. But we were definitely happy to have you on. Are there any last words that you want to give to the viewers?
Well, thanks very much, Dom. I don't think I have much else to say. I think I've spoken a lot, and I thank everyone for the interest and having me do so. But I've probably spoken enough.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. This has been a great interview with Eric in regards to his game Road Fever. We hope to see you all in the upcoming podcast that's going to be this Sunday with Operation or Renegade Operative. And so until then, we'll see you all later. Bye.